what we try to do is we're very differentiated. That has strengths and weaknesses. It's not great for like a video strategy, because if you produce a video about a small town, everyone in the town could watch it, and that's still 5,000 views, which doesn't pay for your video. So there's some, I call that the hyperlocal conundrum. The better you are at your hyperlocal coverage, the fewer people it's relevant to.
Hello, and welcome to the Media Copilot. It's a podcast that explores how AI is changing media, journalism, and content creation. I'm Pete Paschal, longtime tech journalist and founder of the Media Copilot, and I'm excited to bring you fascinating conversations with fellow journalists, media executives, and the people building how the business of news will work in the future. I'm thrilled this week to talk to Warren St. John. Warren is the CEO of Patch. You probably know Patch as the local news platform that covers what's going on in your community. Everything from high school volleyball scores to down trees on Main Street. Recently, the number of communities that Patch serves has skyrocketed, and that's thanks to, what else? AI. Patch can now spin up a local newsletter in any zip code in the US, essentially aiming the power of AI at a specific region to curate information about what's happening there. These AI-powered newsletters have turbocharged Patch's growth from 1,100 communities to more than 30,000. That's an impressive number, but what does it mean at the ground level? And how does it redefine success for Patch, which is already profitable? Warren and I get into all of that, unpacking what exactly is in these newsletters, why ChatGPT isn't good at this, and how Patch's editorial team reacted when the company decided to go down this path. If you're interested in how to scale the power of AI in media without creating slop, I think you're going to like this discussion. And if you do, I'd encourage you to share it with a friend or a colleague. And I'd be grateful if you consider subscribing to the Media Copilot newsletter if you haven't already. Oh, and by the way, if you like discussions like this one, I know you're going to love the webinar I'm hosting on April 10th. Join me, Pete Paschal, in a discussion with David Buttle, founder of DJB Strategies, for a deep dive on AI substitution risk. We all know AI search engines summarize news and kill clicks. The question is, what can you do about it? Well, this webinar is going to give publishers a roadmap to better content strategy by breaking down what kinds of content's most at risk and what tactics might actually help mitigate that risk. Head on over to MediaCopilot.ai to register for the webinar and start future-proofing your media business from the bots. Okay, now here's my conversation with Warren St. John, CEO of Patch. Warren, welcome to the Media Copilot.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming. I'm really thrilled to talk to you. Certainly, as a newsletter author myself, I'm always interested in what's going on in the broader ecosystem. So, really, honestly, with you, I'd love to just jump right into it. So, all the sort of exciting news that you're doing with Patch, obviously, Patch, of a local news platform. I don't know if platform is the right word, but it's kind of like newsletter network. Nothing seems to fit perfectly. So, maybe you have a better noun.
I think the platform works given some of the functionalities we have, but we can get into that. You can see if it holds up.
Yeah, so you do news, you do newsletters for local communities, and up until recently, you've been limited by, I guess, what you might call the speed of the human, right? You could only scale so much with the people that you have. Well, now AI has changed that. Um, I was looking at the stats that you shared when you talked about your program of enhancing this with AI. And previously, you were serving a little over 1,000 communities in the U.S., and now that's up to 30,000. And over 400,000 of your newsletter subscribers are now subscribing to AI newsletter products. And those are all some pretty impressive numbers, but I would love to get down to the goals. Like when you set out to enhance what you're doing with this technology, what did you set out to achieve?
Well, so let's even pull, if it's okay, I'd say let's even pull back a little bit further and just speak about
Sure.
our mission and what we're trying to do at Patch. And the thing we've really committed ourselves to working on for the last decade is creating a sustainable model for local and hyper-local journalism. So that's sort of our North Star in everything that we try, every experiment we undertake is in service of that mission. Um, and so as it relates to this particular product, we and I can dive into a little bit of like what we've done and how it's different. But what we're really trying to do is come up with a better, more sustainable business model. And we take
Mhm.
great personal pride individually across Patch in keeping people informed about what's happening in their communities. It's really kind of our DNA as an organization, and so we're willing to be agnostic about how we accomplish that. So that can be through the local calendars that we built for every community. It can be through our amazing original reporting that our newsroom of 85 reporters does. It could be through using a tool like AI to create more of an aggregated solution to the problem of staying informed. We're really open about how we achieve it, but we've just never been one of those sort of hyper local, or sorry, local news outfits that kind of lives by asking for large yes from big donors, or
Right.
we're not the nonprofit model. We've got to survive on our own. We're bootstrapped, so we need a business that works and can sustain us, and we've been decently successful at that for the last decade. But we want to do what we do for more people in more communities, and we want to do it better. And I think we're pretty tough critics of ourselves, and we're not satisfied at all with where we are. But it's very gratifying to have a product now through our AI newsletters that seem to be very appreciated and valued in many many communities by many many people. So we feel good about that, and so that's our raison d'etre here. Is like we're trying to make a business out of local so that we can keep doing it, and without having to ask for handouts.
Yeah, and I think that's an important way you framed it in terms of bringing the right information to people in the right communities by any means necessary almost, right? Because, that's not always just someone sitting at a computer and typing up whatever happened, even though that's obviously a big part of it. It's really about almost like bridging, here's this information, here's the people who need it. Like, how do we make that process as fast and as efficient as possible? So in a lot of ways, like what you're doing now with AI seems like a very logical next step. And because that's obviously what AI is really really good at, like looking at big data sets, figuring out what's the important thing that the person asked for via, in a chatbot it's via a prompt, but in a lot of headless systems, I guess you call them, it's more automated. And it seems like you're sort of doing it in this way that how, and within in an area, local and hyper local, that really really well. Because my next question would have been, um and maybe you could speak to this a bit, which is to say, could AI just do this on its own? You know what I mean? Like if you didn't do this, would you'd almost feel like this could be an outgrowth of ChatGPT, get the local news through that chatbot or something. But there's still there must be a certain degree of human and process and things that you figured out over a decade plus of doing this that are enhancing that AI experience.
Well, I number one, I hope so, and I think it really gets down. It gets back to the question of what is news, and
Right.
and at the hyper local level, news might broadly be defined as any information about changes in the landscape of the town, and the landscape could be the physical landscape, could be the economic landscape, could be the political landscape, so forth. Um, and some of those things, and again, we're not necessarily for anyone in your audience who's listening to this, this might not apply to a big metro like Miami or New York, or the
Sure.
threshold for what's news in New York is probably higher than the threshold of what is news in Cullman, Alabama, where my family is from, small town, or in a suburb. Something as simple as a change to the leaf pickup schedule could be very practically useful information. And if you and I know we have this notion of local news where we sort of, we put it on some sort of pedestal, and we have this notion of local news, like every local news outfit has to be essentially like ProPublica all day long, but for a town. But if you look at
Yeah.
the local newspaper that we lionize, the one we miss, from 30 years ago, a lot of the information in that was just utilitarian, basic, helpful information, public notices, classifieds, the sports scores from yesterday, the weather forecasts, what's new on the real estate market. All of those things were in the old Birmingham News that I used to get in my driveway, or the Birmingham Post Herald, because we got both when I was a kid, a morning and an afternoon paper. And um, it wasn't all what we consider sort of high church of local journalism. There was some of that, and it's really important. But our view is, you earn the right to do that kind of work by being sustainable. And
Hmm.
when you do that kind of work, ideally you have an audience in place to read it. And I think that's where local news has gotten into a big problem in the last, you know, really since the advent of the platforms, and the shift to digital. We fully abandoned the distribution channels. And
Hmm.
so we did all this great work, and then we published it and sort of hoped that the Facebook algorithm would bless it, or the Google
Right.
algorithm would bless it. And if it didn't bless the great work that we did, then nobody saw that great work. And too bad for us. And so, one of the reasons that we moved into AI newsletters in particular is to have a one-to-one relationship with a broad audience, so that all of our work isn't access to our work isn't mediated by some tech platform that has its own agenda.
Hmm. And with these sort of the big sort of number that I sort of cited at the beginning was sort of going from 1,100 to 30,000. And I guess that sort of the next logical question is, well, how are you defining community here? And what then becomes sort of the like, what do you have? Some of these 30,000 communities single subscribers in one town? I mean, what is sort of the average
So
size there? I guess sort of put that statistic in perspective for me.
sure. So just for context, Patch, when AOL spun Patch out, uh, 11 years ago, Patch was in, I believe, 910 communities.
Hmm.
In the intervening 10 years, we opened 50 state pages, and we opened in a few dozen net new communities. And the challenge was always that when you go into a new community, on day one, you have zero audience, you have the cost of the editor, and then you have, even as you build audience, you have a ramp to the point at which you're selling ads. And one thing you learn in media is that people don't rush to buy ads in brand new media properties. They're, they
Hmm.
they want to know that they can trust you. They want to know who the heck you are, who's behind it. And I think now that's an even bigger concern, because we have so many pink slime, politically motivated, local and
Right.
hyper-local news outfits. They want to know that you're going to stick around. Um,
Hmm.
and by the way, some of the pink slime outfits you see in other news aggregator apps, like when you try to figure out who publishes them, who are they? You can't figure it
Yeah.
out. They're just, who knows?
Totally.
You know if they're in the United States or on planet Earth. It's just the about page is basically hieroglyphics, or it's blank. So you don't know who's
Yeah.
giving you your local news. So there's just there's some trust that has to be built up before advertisers want to be in your local news product. Um, so for all of those reasons, going into a new community was a big challenge. You really need to invest. We found we need to invest a significant amount of money. And from what I understand about others who are doing similar work, that I think seems to hold. That it costs money to go into a new community or city and build a media property. So,
So what are the sort of the levers you pull to earn that trust and normally, and then how do you think about that in the context of these AI newsletters?
Right. So the first thing you have to do is you have to just keep showing up, and
Hmm.
um, and there's no shortcut there. When you say a tree fell on Main Street and people see the tree actually fell on Main Street, this a feedback loop
Hmm.
occurs where they say, "Oh, I read that and then I saw it. I can trust that source." And people probably evaluate new media properties the way they would evaluate a new neighbor or a new friend. You just need to kind of get to know them and see, are they who they say they are. Um, so what AI newsletters do is they really just lower the cost for entering a community and showing up and building some relationship with a subscriber base, showing them, Patch is very politically down the middle. We don't have any sort of hidden agendas that we're promoting. People need to see that, and I think that ends up being a strong asset of the Patch brand in the communities where we've been for a long time. We're trusted and known, and people know that we're
Yeah, but in
sort of
you
playing it.
mentioned sort of the tree falling in the street, and so in a human driven, say, operation that you have, someone might be able to go down there, snap a picture, talk to someone, or at least maybe get some secondhand information from someone there and sort of curate that. How is that handled in the sort of AI version, or is it not? Is it
Sure.
different kinds of information?
Well, so
Again, basically, let's go into like what an AI one of these AI newsletters like. Really walk me through it. What is it? What
sure,
are they put together, and then what is the content?
sure. So just for content, the AI newsletters are news headlines with a very short summary and a link clicking back to the originating publisher. Weather,
Hmm.
um, local events, upcoming events, which ends up being one of the things readers tell us they deeply appreciate. They understand, I think, on some level, that if news happened that's really big, they might hear about it a few different ways, from social
Hmm.
media or from their neighbors. They appreciate the news summary, but what they really are elated about in their feedback to us is some notion of what's coming up in town, so they can actually do something about it. So it's a look. The news is a look forward. The events are the news is the look back. The events are the look forward. There's a nearby news section and nearby events. So we widen the geographical cone a bit and tell you what's happening in the next towns over. And then there's a chatter section, which is social media sources. We pull from the Nextdoor Trending Stories API, from X, from other social media sources, and curate a sort of what's happening in the social media conversation locally as well. And that's its own standalone section. The sensibility and the editorial voice, the vibe, is really
Hmm.
taken from Patch, the human produced version of Patch that our newsroom creates every day. It's a little it's the language is, it's not Latinate, it's plain spoken, it's straightforward. um it's capable of humor and lightness. We there's a corny riddle in every newsletter, and which is
Hmm.
kind of in the questions at the top, the answers at the bottom. And it was originally put in as kind of a lark, mostly for internal consumption, to entertain ourselves while we were building this thing. And we launched with it, and then we took it out, and we got a bunch of angry emails saying, "Hey, where'd the riddle go?" But every
Where's
day,
my moment of
yeah,
zen?
yeah. There's a there's a call to action to suggest a riddle, and every day we get bombarded with new riddles. So I think,
Nice.
it's just it's a it's a human, slightly Norman Rockwellish kind of element that speaks a little bit to our sensibility. We're trying to do something that has the voice of, a friend, something familiar, or something not exactly casual but not stuffy. um,
I gotta say, I would wager AI is pretty good at riddles. I don't know if you've done this, but have you leaned on AI for the riddles at all?
I don't think we don't just say to AI, and in general, this is not a thing we do, and I think it's important for your audience. We don't go to Chat GPT or something and say, "Hey, build a newsletter for this town. We
Mm,
have our own news data sources that we've vetted and trusted or in trust. We have our own event sources. We have calendars in each of these communities where people are
hmm.
adding their own events. So we're starting with a corpus of hyper local data and information that we we can count on, we can lean on, and we have trust in. What we're
Right, which
doing
you're
is
already good at curating, right? Like this is kind of what I was getting at earlier, whereas I think a lot of people sometimes put too much expectations on AI systems, especially general purpose ones, and thinks they're like really good at sort of something you've sort of perfected over a long period of time. And again, they could probably do something passable for one of the communities that you mentioned, but it would probably, screw it up and get the town name wrong with another town that might be similarly named and, miss a bunch of stuff and then hallucinate, and it's like
exactly. I
to
think
get the right
doing that
prompt.
at scale, doing that across
Yeah.
thousands of communities every day, you're going to have lots and lots of headaches. And the one you just mentioned happens to be a big one, which it turns out that something like a third of U.S. communities share a name with another community in another state. Um,
Right.
I saw we had a user complaint the other day from I think it was Greenport, New York. There are two Greenport, New Yorks,
Mm,
not just one
yeah.
Greenport, New York. So you have to do a lot of work to make sure the
Wow.
right news is getting the right Greenport. And just because it's
How did
Greenport,
that get by Albany?
yeah, just because it's Greenport, New York doesn't necessarily get you there. So to rely on AI for all of that, is going to be a challenge. So what we really ask the AI to do is to take the information that we have collected, we've pre-processed it, we've sort of bundled certain news stories together, because if it's a big news story, there might be 15 stories about that
Mm,
issue or that event. One might be from the New York Times on a given day or the Washington Post, and then the other from the local, nonprofit blog that covers the town really well. So we don't want a newsletter that has links to, where the five news links are all to the same story. So we do a lot of work on our side to kind of get the mix right, to make sure that we're covering broadly, what's the most important news in town. And that is, I will say, a thing that's been really helpful to us is, we're all very steeped in jobs to be done, product development, the jobs to be done product development framework. And our chairman, Charlie Hale, studied under Clay Christensen at Harvard Business School and was a mentee, and is in Christensen, was one of the co-founders of Jobs to Be Done product development theory, and it basically holds that people don't buy your product just to buy a product; they hire it to do a job. And if someone comes along and does that job faster or more accurately than you do, then the customers will leave your product and go to the other one. So for us, the job that we're trying to um, get hired to do on a regular basis for our subscribers is tell me the most important things happening in my town that I need to know. And one thing you
mm,
learn in that formulation, and if you do the user and reader research that we have, people actually don't want to know everything. They're too busy.
mm,
They want to know the most important things. And so the curatorial function really is important. And the reality is, and another way to look at what we're trying to do here is, for any town in America, there is a very fragmented information landscape. There's stuff on the, some towns might have a great high school sports blog on their high school website. They might have a great uh, Facebook feed managed by the local public information officer at the police or fire department. They could have a great hyper local nonprofit blog and also get regular coverage in a paid subscription daily of a nearby metro or TV stations, NPR stations, you name it. There's this sort of very fragmented information landscape. Not all of it is just strictly from news publishers. It can be from any number
for
of
sure.
sources. And so what we've learned is that people really want this information. They care about what's happening outside their front door. They want to be clued in. It speaks to their sense of belonging to the community, which we can talk about in a moment. Um, and their sense of sort of safety, their sense of civic engagement, but they don't want to spend a lot of time assembling it because they've got too many other things going
Mhm.
on in their life. They've got their job, their kids, their hobbies, their health, um, their their causes. They've got national news. They've got entertainment. So what they really want is someone to go distill this information, go find it all first, and then distill it and then tell me almost executive memo style, what do I need to know? What's coming up that I might want to attend in town or tell my kids to attend or my best friends? Um, and they want someone to go do that for them. And so that's the very kind of narrow kind of rifle shot of a job we're trying to do. Now, once, let's say we accomplish that, and I think we're doing a pretty good job out of the gate with our V1, then there are many layers that one could add to that. In Georgia, we have a breaking news editor for the state who sits on top of these AI newsletters and can publish to any community, uh, could publish
Mm.
statewide news. Um, we have in our states like Connecticut and New Jersey, where we have big news teams, you might have a dozen local reporters doing hyperlocal news across a subset of communities. There's no reason we can't build to that layer of density. The difference is we're kind of building it from the ground up with some audience in place that we've built and earned the trust of over time in a cost effective way, rather than doing what we used to have to do and what AOL tried to do over a decade ago, which is go spend a lot of money town by town and hope that the
Right.
business model works out eventually.
Yeah, and I think sort of the key unlock and sort of having sort of a broader definition of what probably was traditionally thought of as news, like you mentioned, the sort of ProPublica analogy. I think it's very apt because there's a lot of whenever we talk about local news and news deserts, I do think there's a lot of almost like eat your vegetables aspect to it. But like you said, with things like Facebook feeds and these other community, these ways these either public institutions or local businesses interact with their communities on various networks, there's news is there, right? It's there to be sort of curated by something that could be a human or it could be an AI. And that sort of leads to my next question, which is that okay, does the audience care, right? And how what has basically been the reaction, which I think might have to do a little bit with whatever your transparency policy is. I assume if something's AI generated, there's at least some marker or there at least probably some guidelines somewhere people can go to, or maybe it's just totally obvious. But um so I guess I'd ask you sort of how do you communicate the nature of these newsletters to the people subscribing to them, and then what's been the reaction?
So we're transparent about how we make everything. We also have basic thumbs up, thumbs down under each news story where users can give us feedback on whether or not they think this is relevant or belongs
Gotta
in the
have it.
town. And then down at the bottom, we have a big thumbs up, thumbs down, where we essentially say, how in the loop or how caught up do you feel on what's happening in your community after reading this newsletter? And this is a really encouraging thing for us, and it's given us a lot of excitement internally. Over the last, I think that the last data I saw was like 6 months, 6 month look back or so. We have a 93.6 thumbs up rating.
Nice.
So that feels great. And once you click thumbs up or thumbs down, you get to tell us why in your own language, and we will word cloud those responses or summarize them in ChatGPT. I think the number one complaint we have, I guess there are probably two. One is not much happening, and that's partly a
Right.
factor of there are a lot of communities where you could sign up for a newsletter where there's just actually not much happening, and there's not that there's no magic button for that. um, and then the other is we get frustration when we link to paywall news sources,
Right.
but our view is you should support those local news sources. They're important,
Hmm.
they matter, and we want to send them attention and traffic and hopefully subscribers and contribute overall to the news, the hyperlocal and local news ecosystem. And so we're pretty steadfast about that. And I don't think anyone's served by just pretending those publications don't exist. Our standard response is, thanks for the feedback. We suggest you subscribe to your local news
Hmm.
source, and we bring in their headlines because we want to make sure that um, we're doing the job. The job is tell me the most important things happening in town. If one of those stories is behind a paywall, well, so be it.
Yeah, I find that complaints like that are almost like a feature, not a bug, if you know what I mean. In that, well, if you keep getting frustrated by this paywall again and again, eventually you're just going to break down. Oh, I guess I got to subscribe, and it's
Right.
it's never pleasant to open your wallet, but it is like you have to sort of admit to yourself if you're being thoughtful about it. There's a value here, and I should start paying for it.
Absolutely.
So yeah, yeah, it's sort of you're I guess one of the many ways you support local journalism, but I would ask you about how you think you might even compete either with local journalism or other competitors who are doing this. Now, you mentioned some of the folks who are doing slop, right? And I think there might be a factor there in the sense that they're giving AI a bad name, and maybe that's been hampering your efforts in some way. But I'm curious, like who do you think of as your competitors? I know there's 6 a.m. City, you mentioned next door, and it sounds like you have more of a partnership there. But who do you consider your competitors? And how is this AI initiative sort of positioning yourself either differently or at a higher level? How do you sort of see the landscape of hyper local and local news?
Sure. So it's interesting. I think if you ask people at Patch who our competition is, it really depends on what role they play at the company. If you ask like a local news reporter in a competitive area who our competition is, they'll mention the other publication. Our local sales team
Right.
would probably say, our competition is likely like Google or maybe next door. That's a possibility. Our national team would definitely say, like when we lose a deal, we probably lose it to that. Those marketing dollars probably go to Google or
Right.
Facebook,
Right.
and so I mean that's I know that specifically to be the case because marketers we have local businesses who target hyperlocal communities on Patch, but then we have brands that want to target our whole audience, and we have an audience that's you know it's 99% US, it's 80+% homeowners. We service a lot of mid-sized metros and suburbs, so it ends up being a very sought after audience, two-thirds women. So our national buyers are buying a certain type of person everywhere. And then local or regional buyers, a lot of healthcare chains will, hospital chains will target like a region, like Long Island and New York,
Mm,
that sort of thing. So, competition is all of those, and also not quite any of them because there's no one quite doing what Patch is doing. There's no scaled news hyper local news platform that generates as much of its content as we do ourselves. There are aggregators out there that are full aggregators. Nextdoor is a UGC powered platform, but for hyper local news, we're sort of the only game in town. And
mhm,
what we try to do is we're very differentiated. That has strengths and weaknesses. It's not great for like a video strategy because if you produce a video
mm,
about a small town, everyone in the town could watch it, and that's still 5,000 views, which doesn't pay for your video. So there's some, I call that the hyper local conundrum. The better you are at your hyper local coverage, the fewer people it's relevant to. And so
yeah, yeah.
we've built some products on Patch, digital products like our promoted calendar events and our feature business offering for local businesses that are not CPM based, um, and and really they try to take advantage of the segmentation that we allow, the ability to target a specific community of people, and not to waste those dollars on communities that aren't relevant. Um, so we've tried to offset the the weaknesses and lean into the strengths. And the main strength is people really want to know what's going on in their communities. And so
Mm-hmm.
engagement, our email open rates have always been, well above, I think, in news industry benchmarks. We're telling you what's going
Mm-hmm.
on in your town for free. Who doesn't want to check that out with some regularity? And so we benefited on the engagement side from being hyper local, as opposed to just being another news source in a big metro, say, where you've got a bunch of alternatives.
Right. I'm curious about the on the AI initiative. Did you get pushback from your editorial team? And from that, like, what is the whole initiative taught you about innovating with AI in media?
So we didn't really get pushback, but part of that is sort of how we approached it. Well, one thing that we've learned, we're always experimenting and trying new things. And Patch has been, we were never a print, Patch never had a print, version. It was always digital. So it's sort of part of our DNA is, in our culture, is embracing the new and trying to lead and not just be reactive. So I'd say our culture is generally much more accepting of innovative efforts than maybe some other legacy newsrooms might have been. Maybe that's all gone now
Mm,
anyway, but that was my experience early on. I think now
yeah.
probably everyone in local news knows we've all got to be innovating all the time. And particularly with AI, it's like yet another, it was social media platforms, and then along with SEO, and now it's AI. There's always something to try to keep up with. So I think that's probably baked into most newsrooms now, but we've always had that mentality. At the same time, because we are always trying something new, we don't make a big deal about it internally
Mm,
early
okay.
on, because what we found is that just stresses people out. You know, like,
Mm,
if unless something's maybe going to work or getting some traction, why distract and bother everybody with the news that, okay, we're working on this thing over here. It may or may not work. It's not going to affect your day to day yet, but if it's going to, we'll let you know. It just actually ends up, right. It ends up, exactly. It just ends up stressing people out, as it would stress any of us out. And so we've kind of made a practice of not burdening our team with news of efforts that we're undertaking until we think they might actually be something that they need to know about. And the other thing that we've done is and this comes again out of like the Clay Christensen sort of view of disruption. It's very hard for incumbent organizations to disrupt themselves. And
true.
his belief was, the only way for companies to disrupt themselves was through sort of parallel efforts. You take a group, you put them over here in a room in a lab, you disconnect them from the main organization, and you tell them, you have new rules, go figure it out. And what I've learned about that that's really interesting is it's not just because humans don't like change, and humans don't like change generally. But it's
Hmm.
not just that. It's also that, like, all the systems in place. And you think about the word, the word organization. It's organized. Organizations are organized, and they're organized to sort of instantiate the things that they need to do right now to succeed, right? And so that means, for a media company, it means your Salesforce instance is built in a certain way to support the current products that you sell and the way your sales team works today. So if you have this kind of SWAT team over here that's going to come up with some new crazy idea, they're going to say, well, we need to sell it this way and that way. And then someone on the sales team said, well, we can't quite do that the way we've set Salesforce up. But if you just change it a little bit like this, then we could use Salesforce, and you could keep track of your customers that way. And everyone says, oh yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Let's do that. Um, and then you do that like 10 or 15 times. And the next thing you know, your innovative, disruptive effort looks just like your current products, right?
Right,
And it's
right.
not because
Yeah.
anybody was consciously trying to do that or wanted to sabotage your efforts or anything else. It's just because you were trying to make it work in the context of all the systems that you put in place to organize the thing that you were already doing. And so that creates like a
Mm,
tremendous sort of wall of it guards, it's good. It guards the things that work and makes them safe and harder to disrupt and all of that. But then when you do need to change them, it's really hard to do it from
yeah.
within. You have to kind of set it. So actually, when we were testing this initially, yes, we use Salesforce at Patch, but we set up, we a separate HubSpot account to do all of our, completely separate from the organization, so that nobody had to bother with the fact that there was this new type of data flowing in this new format. And if this is too in the weeds, I apologize, but it actually
Oh
gets
no,
down to
that's
specificity. It's these little details that actually have to be attended to get a truly disruptive thing kind of off the ground in the context of an organization that's very used to doing things a certain way.
yeah, totally. I think that's going to resonate with a lot of folks out there listening.
I
So I'd
would
like
say,
to just
just on that point, just since you brought it up, like to anyone listening and trying to build disruptive products, that your organization is just not going to embrace or even understand. I would say just don't make that don't take on that burden. Don't try to get anyone to
mhm,
understand. Go build it in parallel in some skunk work,
right.
separate it out. And then when you've got data that shows that it works, then you can come back and you're presenting not just a crazy idea, but a crazy idea with some positive signals behind it to get people excited about. And absent the positive signals, it's only going to seem threatening or maybe just distracting and, a headache and just yet another thing that some, you know, media executive is visiting on his or her hardworking team. It's got all of that happens a lot. Well, certainly we've done that.
Yeah.
But I think that's the best chance for success.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. It's good advice. You got to sort of separate it out until it's proven, really. Um, cool. So, like, I'd love to wrap things up just kind of with a look ahead, and I'd love to follow a couple of things I'm seeing, and I'm sure you've heard. So, there's a lot of wisdom about like, have we passed peak newsletter, right? And certainly every 5 or 10 years, someone writes something about the death of email, which of course never happens. And we all still have email, we all still have our inboxes, but undoubtedly, like, there are more newsletters than ever before. And is that something that is destined to be on the wane? And will AI accelerate that? Because the other obvious thing is the trend of AI, and I mentioned it earlier, that just these general purpose systems are even going to get better at doing things. I mean, everyone always says today is the worst AI is ever going to be, right? And it's just going to get great at everything. So I feel like you might have these twin pressures now. As much as you're seeing some good early success with this initiative, AI just generally is creating pressures, and then you have this perhaps this peak newsletter phenomenon. So what's your stance on peak newsletter? How do you see the pressure of AI, and then what's next for Patch?
So I do think there's probably real risk in just the glut of newsletters that are available. Um, I don't know in the end like how many of those are actually going to survive as businesses. So it's the barrier for entry is pretty low, but to keep doing it, even AI costs something, and the time that goes into it is valuable as well. So I think it's maybe peak launch, maybe the peak year for launching newsletters, or we're on our way there. Sustainability is probably a separate question. How many of these things are actually going to be around in a couple of years? And then to me, that all gets back to what job do they do? So if you produce
Right.
a newsletter that really creates value for people and makes their lives better, I suspect you've got a good shot of sticking around. And if you really don't care too much about how you deliver that information, you could send it via SMS, you could send it in a push notification in an app, you could zap it to the chip we all have installed in our foreheads in 5 years, or whatever the system of delivery ends up being. To me, that's the most important thing. It's not the newsletter is just a way to convey information. What's
Hmm.
the value of the information you're conveying? and can it be obtained more easily through other means? Because jobs to be done would tell you if someone can get it faster or more accurately from another source, that's where they're going to go. So I would worry a lot more about settling on something that's valuable, and then
Mm-hmm.
over time figuring out what are the best ways to deliver it. Maybe deliver it, probably the smart thing is to deliver it lots of different ways, because different types of people want to consume content differently. It depends on the product, of course, but and I think,
Maybe
yes,
you could see the patch entry in an AI summary or something broader. You know what I mean? Sometimes I see patch stuff on my Google News because it comes up with my local community. Um,
that
it
gets to
fits
the
with my
trust
curated
issue.
set.
I think I agree.
Yeah.
So that gets to the trust issue, because yes, AI is going to make content. It's already made content creation, like the ultimate commodity. Press a button and you've got content. But can you trust it? Who's
Mm.
who's standing behind it? Who's filtering it? Who's curating it? Who vouches for it? How do you know the sources are any good? I think that becomes a differentiator probably in any competitive field. Um, and I do think that's where Patch has been around for almost 15 years now. The communities where we've been established, people like us, they know us, they trust us. That ends up being, I think, an advantage. And in new communities, we've got to establish that and earn that over time. Um, and we do that, I think, by continuing our adherence to the mission, and just trying to be good and be valuable and be economical. People want something that's fast, and I think so. Format matters, and urgency and timeliness matter.
Nice. Warren St. John, thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for your interest. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to my conversation with Warren St. John of Patch. And if you like what you heard, please just take a minute to leave a rating and review for the Media Copilot in your podcast app. Also, don't forget about our webinar on April 10th on AI substitution risk for publishers. Check out mediacopilot.ai to sign up, and be sure to check out our AI training courses on AI for journalists and communications professionals. Be seeing you in the future.